Okay, welcome back to all of you guys. We're going to move into this next topic of the 5 precepts. Like I mentioned, these are 5 impactful decisions that you can make wisely or unwisely, and you're going to experience either wholesome or unwholesome results related to these. So if you have heard that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, this isn't actually what the Buddha taught. He uses much more illuminating language, and you guys are going to be able to see that here as I share this with you. So as always, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. Here at the temple, you can use the mics, and then online, you guys can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So here, this is the first precept. The Buddha says, abandoning the taking of what is not given. Refrain from taking, I'm sorry, you know what? Let me back up a second. I did realize there's a certain piece here that I usually teach that I need to share with you guys before we go into this. Whenever you're learning something like this from the Buddha, it's important to understand that he's not giving you rules or commandments. What he's teaching you is the natural laws. He's helping you to see this cause and effect, that when we make choices a certain way, we're going to experience either wholesome results or unwholesome results. And it's your life, it's your decisions, it's your results. So when I share these teachings with you here, I'm not attempting to convince you to do anything or force you to do anything. I'm informing you about this natural law so that you can understand this natural law. But depending on how you have learned in the past from other people, you might see the things that the Buddha is teaching here and think of them as rules or commandments. And it's important that you don't do that, he's helping you to be able to see this natural law of cause and effect or action and result. In each one of these precepts, by practicing them, it's actually going to help you to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. You'll be able to see as you go through how the mind would need craving, anger, and ignorance to be able to do any of the things that he's talking about here. So this first one, he says, abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, you need to be able to investigate and examine his teachings, and that you don't just take things on face value, but instead you really penetrate into it. So obviously what he's teaching here is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So one of the first things you might ask yourself is, what is a living being? Don't even assume that you know what a living being is. So he gives a teaching called the 5 aggregates that helps you to understand what is a living being. What a living being is described as is that it has these 5 collections or 5 criteria or 5 elements that a living being, and you can verify this as I'm explaining it to you, is a living being is going to have physical form, right? Because you know you're a living being, you have physical form. A living being is going to have feelings. A living being is going to have perceptions. They're going to have volitional formations, and they're going to have choice. They're going to have a consciousness. So let me explain to you what each one of these things are. Physical form, that's a pretty easy one. You can see the physical form of the body, right? All living beings are going to have physical form. What a feeling is those conditioned feelings, the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Then there's perceptions. That's the third aggregate or third criteria. What a perception is your views and opinions about the world. A living being is going to have views and opinions about the world. They're going to look out at the world in a certain way. The fourth one is volitional formations. What these are choices and decisions. A living being is going to have free will. They're going to be able to make their own choices and decisions. And then the fifth one is a consciousness or the mind. So every living being is going to have form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. And the reason why it's important for you to know what a living being is because anytime you harm a living being, that harm is going to come back to you. So you need to make sure that you know what a living being is by understanding the 5 aggregates. And you can independently verify this because you know you're a living being. And just like you have these 5 aggregates and you can verify that, you can see that a squirrel has these 5 aggregates, a rabbit, a bird, a snake. But then you can take something that you know is not a living being, and you can also reflect on this. Because like this chair I'm sitting in, ask yourself, does it have physical form? It does, right? Does it have feelings? No. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Doesn't have those. Does it make choices and decisions? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street, and set itself back down? It can't do that, right? It doesn't have volitional formations. Does it have a consciousness or a mind? doesn't have a consciousness or a mind, right? So you can see this is not a living being. So this definition of the five aggregates has held up for 2,500 years. The Buddha has described the natural laws accurately of how to determine what is or is not a living being. Well, that's what you need to learn in order to really understand the natural laws. But in the process of getting to that point, you might use this as kind of like a short way to think about it. This is not always true, but a living being is generally going to come from an egg, a sperm, and it's going to have a consciousness. There are some living beings that don't come from an egg, a sperm. They all have a consciousness, but they don't all come from an egg and a sperm. But this will help you in probably about 99% of the cases. So as you're learning the five aggregates and you maybe haven't penetrated into them deep enough, you could use something like this to be able to help you. And through this, you can see that things like plants or bacteria or virus are not a living being. While we oftentimes think of them as being alive, and we tend to talk that way, these are not living beings. And you can see this through the five aggregates, that a tree, it has physical form, it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have perceptions, it doesn't have volitional formations, and it doesn't have a consciousness. But the thing is in the unenlightened state, with the lack of wisdom and that unknowing of true reality, we tend to speak in ways that doesn't represent true reality. We might say, oh, don't kill that tree. Or we might say, I'm going to kill this bacteria that's in my body. Or I'm going to kill this virus in my body. You're not actually killing the tree. You're not actually killing the virus because it's not a living being. What you're doing is you're harvesting that plant. You are eliminating the bacteria from the body. And not only can you see this through the five aggregates, but you can see this through the natural law of Kamma. If these things were living beings, you would experience harm. If you're killing something, you would experience harm coming back. But when you eliminate a bacteria from the body, you don't experience unwholesome results. You experience wholesome results. So if this bacteria was truly a living being and you actually killed it, then you would experience unwholesome kamma or unwholesome results. But you can see you experience wholesome results when you eliminate this bacteria from the body. So you can see it through the five aggregates that plants, bacteria, and viruses are not living beings, but you can see it through the natural law of Kamma, that when we harvest a tree, we haven't caused any harm to a living being, and now we can use this for resources to sustain our life. What we've learned over the years is that if we're going to harvest one tree, we need to plant 5 or 10, right? The problem that we had previously is that we weren't planting, right? And that's what ran us into all kinds of difficulties with the environment, because we weren't planting. It wasn't because we were harvesting, it was because we weren't planting. So then when we started planting, then we started experiencing wholesome results, right? So first thing you need to understand with this particular precept is what is a living being, because the Buddha is teaching you to live compassionately. What compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others, that you would like to have that in your mind as a mental quality and practice that with all living beings. So you're going to need to ask yourself, if you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, would you participate in these things? Euthanasia of a human or an animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, any government-sponsored killing, and murder. These are all intentional killings. But whether you choose to do these things or not is your choice. I can give you examples in situations where these could be wise choices, and I can give you examples where they could be unwise choices of these certain things. So I'm going to use a few of these and give you some examples so you can see this for yourself. The Buddha is not teaching you black and white here. He's not teaching you to preserve all life at all costs. That's what some people think when they read something like this, but that's not what he's teaching you. You don't see him saying preserve all life at all costs. What you see him saying is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So let's take one of these, or maybe 2 or 3 of them, and help you guys see how you're going to need to move to this higher consciousness, and you're going to need to make decisions that are wise for you, and you're going to know all the variables, and you're going to be able to make those decisions. I can't make those decisions for you, and I won't make those decisions for you. I'll give you advice, I'll give you guidance, but I won't tell you how to make a decision. I will just say, if you do things this way, here's what you'll experience. If you do things this way, here's what you'll experience. And then it's up to you to make the decision for yourself. So I'm going to take this one, termination of a pregnancy. And sometimes people look at this as a political discussion. I don't think of it that way, because this is a medical technology that we have, and in some cases it can be very helpful. In other situations it could potentially be harmful. It just really depends on the situation. But at the end of the day, it's up to each individual to decide for themselves whether or not they're going to do this or not. It's not up to me to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't be doing with their own body. It's up to each individual person to make that choice for themselves. But let me give you some examples with the natural law of Kamma, where you can see in some situations it could be helpful, and in some situations it could potentially be harmful. So if I was a female, which you can see I'm not, I don't have a womb in my abdomen. But if I did, and I had a fetus growing inside the womb, and medical technology and a doctor told me that, hey, there's this fetus in your womb and it's never going to live a viable life outside the womb. We can see that through our medical technology. And if you allow it to continue to grow inside the body, it's threatening your life and you could actually die, right? So if I left that being in there, now I'm threatening my own life, right? I could potentially die. And now this isn't living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And perhaps what I might decide to do is I might decide to terminate this pregnancy, right? And now by terminating the pregnancy, I can feel at ease. I don't have to feel guilty or shameful about this situation, because I know that I'm living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Because whenever you have compassion for living beings, it needs to start with this being who you are. If you don't have compassion for this being, you can't have compassion for other beings. So you need to have compassion for this being. So in this situation, which is probably like once, maybe twice in a lifetime that you're going to experience something like this, maybe someone decides to terminate a pregnancy, and that could be a wise decision in that situation. But then there could be maybe another situation. Let's just say I was regularly having sex with lots of different people. I was regularly becoming pregnant, and maybe 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 times I'm having termination of pregnancy. Each time I do one of these operations or these surgeries, these procedures, it's causing harm to my own body, and it's affecting the health of my own body. And now I'm using it as birth control, where I'm killing viable beings that are inside the womb. I'm now killing them regularly and repeatedly. And now this is going to cause harm to this body because of my decision to continue to terminate these pregnancies over and over and over again, when in reality I could probably use other types of birth control rather than using termination of life as a birth control, right? So in both situations, an individual has to decide for themselves what they're going to do. In the one situation, they're experiencing beneficial results. They're saving their life. In another situation, they're actually going to be damaging this body, and they can actually experience difficulties and struggles because of that. And this is the natural law of Kamma based on the decisions that we're making. Let's take something like a war. A government could say to us, hey, go over there and kill those people. And if you go over there and kill those people, that would be completely fine with us. But if you come over here on our land and you kill the people that are here, we're going to prosecute you for murder, right? In this situation, this is a human law, and that's why it's imperfect, that they can tell you, go over there and kill those people, but the natural law of Kamma is functioning at all times, and it's going to affect you, whether you're aware of it or not. And this is why going off to war may or may not be a wise decision for you, because you're killing, you can actually experience problems yourself. This is why soldiers are oftentimes killed. They may experience significant injuries like amputations and things like this, or brain injuries. They can oftentimes get addicted to drugs and alcohol and other substances. When they come back home from war, if they've survived the war, they can have a hard time reintegrating into society. They oftentimes stay addicted to drugs and alcohol. They oftentimes commit suicide and things like this. This is the natural law of Kamma that they're being experiencing, that they're being affected by the choice that they made to go off to war. So why a government could say, go off to war and kill those people, and we are okay with that, the natural law of Kamma is there helping you to be able to see that it could potentially be an unwise decision for you. And now you're going to experience the results of these kinds of things. So there's multiple types of decisions that you might come in contact with that you're going to need to figure out how to apply this. And each situation is a little bit different, right? Let's just say that you find out you have termites that are eating your home and you have an infestation of termites at your home. Well, if you just let these beings keep eating your home, that wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because now the people who use that shelter and depend on that shelter wouldn't be able to have that shelter. So you're not living compassionately for all living beings. So you're going to need to get rid of these beings that are eating your home in some way. So living compassionately might mean that you do some research on the internet and try to figure out, can I eradicate these beings without killing them? And after you do a little bit of research, what you might come back with is, today, there's no way to do that. And you might need to hire somebody to come and get rid of this, exterminate the termites. And in this situation, you are living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because you've tried to figure out a way to eradicate them without actually killing them. But because these beings are causing harm is now coming to them. And this is the challenge of being in the animal world, is that they don't have the level of consciousness as a human being, because as a human being, we would understand that if we eat wood, go out into the forest where we're not causing harm to anyone and eat the trees in the forest, and then nobody will be harmed and we'll live a perfectly fine life. But these insects, they don't have that level of consciousness. They don't see the difference between the wood at the house and the wood in the forest, and they're just eating the wood at the house. And now, because they're causing harm is coming to them, right? So this is where being in the human realm, it really is helpful, because we have a higher level of consciousness to be able to determine these kinds of things. Sometimes students ask me about this DNR. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. This is called a do not resuscitate. This is a legal document that you can sign while you're alive that tells your living relatives that if this body dies, don't bring it back to life. And sometimes people ask me, is that living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? And the answer here is yes, it is, because you haven't intentionally killed anybody. You're saying, I'm comfortable with death. If this body dies, that's completely fine with me. Don't need to bring me back to life. You don't need to use medical technology. So there hasn't been any actual intentional killing there. Sometimes people ask me about defense and protection, that if somebody breaks into their home, what should they do? Well, each situation is going to be a little bit different, but let's just play this out. Let's just say somebody breaks into your home at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. They break in through the window and they're coming in, right? And you hear this when you wake up and you're in your bed late at night. Well, I can assure you that that person coming in at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning through your broken window, they're not delivering chocolate and flowers, right? They're there to cause some harm. That's what they're there to do. So if possible, what I would suggest somebody do is get out. Just get out of the house. If this person would like to break something, they'd like to steal something or what have you, just get out of the house. Call the police. They have the tools, the equipment, and the training, and they can take care of the situation. But in some situations, you're not going to be able to get out of the house. That's why the Buddha is not giving you a decision tree, that if this happens, do that. If this happens, do that. Because that would be a permanent answer for every single situation. And there's not a permanent answer for every single situation. You might look out your window and there's a gang of people outside your house. You're not going to go outside. That would be unwise for you to do that. Or maybe there's a fire and the place around your house is on fire. That would be unwise to go outside. So maybe it's better to stay inside. So in this situation, you might be backed up against the corner and now this person's coming at you with maybe a baseball bat or a knife or something like this. And if you just stood there and let them stab you to death, that wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So if you needed to defend this body or the people around you, hey, that's the Kamma, that this person is coming in to cause harm, and now harm is coming back to them. You're not going out into the world intending to kill somebody. You're just there minding your own business, and somebody comes into your home, and now you're defending this body, and this harm that's coming to this individual, that's their Kamma, that because they're choosing to cause harm, harm is coming to them. Sometimes people ask me about consuming animal products or going vegan. And what I share with you guys here is that if you choose to go vegan, this is going to help you to experience less sickness and less illness in the body. But whether or not you choose to do this or not, it's your choice. What you'll find is that if you research this, that when you're eating animal flesh, you're not just eating the flesh, you're eating drugs and hormones and toxins that are in the animal flesh. They've actually taken wild fish out of clean water streams in places like the USA, and they've tested the flesh, and they found all kinds of drugs and hormones and toxins in wild fish. There were things that weren't supposed to be there, like cocaine and antidepressant and things like this were in the flesh of the fish, because us human beings have been flushing that down into the toilet for so many years that it's polluted the water table. And now when you're eating the fish, you're not just eating the flesh of the fish, you're eating those drugs and hormones and toxins. And even manufactured animals, the farmers are typically putting hormones and antibiotics and things like this into the animal in order to grow it faster so that they can make more money. And then when you're eating that meat, you're also eating those things. So these teachings are independently verifiable, that you will see that if you choose to gradually move to a plant-based food supply, that the body will become healthier and the mind will become healthier. Because if you're eating that drugs and hormones and toxins, it's affecting your mind. You'll see that your mind will be more clear and more stable by not choosing to eat meat. But whether you choose to do that or not, it's a choice for you to make. Only you can make those kinds of choices. But I'm just sharing with you the natural law of Kamma, that if you do choose to do this, you're going to see beneficial results. Wholesome Kamma is going to come from you choosing to not base your life on eating animals, but instead plant-based food supply. So do you guys have any questions on anything on this first precept? Yeah, we have mics here.
Two questions. One is if you could give us an example about euthanasia. I don't know how to pronounce that in English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So euthanasia, I would not, at this point in my life, I would never euthanize an animal or a human. The reason why is because in order for this being to experience improvement in this life or in their future life, they need to be able to make their own free will decisions. And me choosing to kill somebody else or kill another being is me taking the responsibility of this being's life, and then I'm choosing to kill this individual. So whether it was an animal that was in a car accident or this animal is sick or what have you, that animal needs to live out its full life and its full Kamma. That in the animal world, it can't get to enlightenment. It's going to need to be reborn. So the problem that animal is experiencing is not that it was in a car accident or that it's sick. The problem that it's experiencing is that it's stuck in this continuous cycle of rebirth. Getting hit by a car or getting cancer or leukemia or anything like this is just impermanence, that the body is not going to be permanently healthy. Oftentimes when people have animals as pets, they're really struggling with painful feelings themselves because they're attached to this animal, and they think the way to solve this is to actually euthanize the animal, when in reality, you can let that animal live out its full natural life, and then it's going to experience an improved rebirth in its next life. But if we kill this animal prematurely, now we're making the decision for the animal rather than allowing the animal to fully live out its entire natural life. So now, because of the killing, we're going to now experience results of that. And this is where oftentimes human beings will experience a guilt or shame or fear due to their decision to actually kill. Or they might experience sadness or frustration in these kinds of situations. And that's the natural law of Kamma, that their mind is now experiencing that as a result of them having chosen to kill this other being, when they could just let this being live out its natural life. And that would be much better in this situation. So whether someone chooses to do that or not, it's their choice. But that would be my guidance to someone, is to not do euthanasia. Some students have asked me those questions over time, and I've given them that advice. And different people have made different decisions on those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And in some situations, at least one that I can remember, they were told by the doctor, like, hey, your dog's not going to live more than another week or two, and you should euthanize it. and they ended up getting in touch with me and they said, hey, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, if you do it this way, here's what you'll experience. If you do it this way, here's what you'll experience. They ultimately chose not to euthanize the animal. The animal lived for another 1.5 to 2 years. It made a full recovery after a couple of months, and it lived a full natural life, and it died on its own about 1.5 or 2 hours or 2 years later. So this person, in my opinion, they made a much wiser decision than killing that animal just because somebody said, hey, this animal's not going to live for more than another week or two. So that's the complication that one puts themselves in when they're making a decision for another being of whether to kill it or not. That now you're taking on the responsibility of implementing this killing, and it's producing unwholesome results for yourself and for this other being.
I was thinking more of a human being living in his or her testament that they if they are in vegetative state, they do not want to be kept alive. But even so, if you maybe can tell me about that, but even in the example that you gave, how can you be sure that keeping a being, whether it's an animal or a human being alive, isn't just suffering? How can you be sure that they're gonna have a rebirth?
Mm-hmm. So what you were talking about at the beginning is actually a DNR, a do not resuscitate. So if someone's in a vegetative state, if they have a DNR in place, they're saying, hey, I'm completely comfortable with death. Don't bring me back to life. That's what that is. So that would be not be an intentional killing, but that is somebody who's choosing not to be brought back or stay alive through medical technology. If there's a being that's in the animal realm, it will experience rebirth. It can't get to enlightenment from that existence, so they would have to be able to be reborn. As a human being, if we choose that we want to be euthanized, this is a craving on our side, because nowadays in some jurisdictions you can actually choose to have suicide. You can kill yourself through medical technology, and it's accepted, and you're not going to experience any difficulties through the government, but you will be reborn in that situation because you have a craving for extermination of this life. There's a longing, yearning to end this life. So craving, not only does it cause discontentedness, but that's the cause of rebirth. So if you die with any kind of craving or clinging in your mind, you will experience rebirth. So for someone who is sick or ill, what they would be wise to do is to live out that life, that if they took medicines or whatever to lessen the pain, now they're going to be able to fully experience all of their Kamma in this life, and they can either get to enlightenment during this life or at death. They can actually get to enlightenment at death, and then they won't experience a rebirth. The ideal would be to get to enlightenment at prior to death, but the next best option would be to have enlightenment at death. So that's not going to be able to occur if someone has a craving for extermination of life. They won't get to enlightenment at death. So oftentimes we think like, oh my goodness, this body is sick. They're suffering. The only reason why they're suffering is because they're craving in their mind for permanent health of the body. If you get to the point where you don't have a craving for permanent health, now you're not going to suffer and have painful feelings as you experience this unhealthy condition of the body. So because somebody doesn't know how to deal with the craving for permanent health, they think the way to solve this problem is to kill this being, when in reality, if they let this being live out its life, you can actually experience better results that way.
How can you be so sure that rebirth is a thing that actually exist? I mean, where do we get the proof, or where do we see that this is actually happening?
Sure. If you look at volume 11, chapter 105 in the book series, I give 17 different ways to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. Right now, you're believing that you maybe only have one life. But if you study the original teachings of the Buddha and you look at chapter 105 of volume 11, you'll be able to see the 17 different ways to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. There's a ton of evidence in the world that'll help you to be able to verify this.
Okay. Thank you. My second question was regarding consuming animal products. You were saying, of course, because that shouldn't be done because that's harmful for us in the first place. But then what if, for example, we know someone that is breeding animals and feeding them well and letting them live in a kind of good way? Would that be acceptable, or in the end you're still eating a dead being that you killed for you to be fed?
Yeah, I didn't say that eating animals was unacceptable. I didn't say that. What I said was if somebody moves to a plant-based food supply, that they're going to see more health and more improvement to the condition of their body and their mind. But because human beings at one time were plant-based eaters, we were exclusively plant-based eaters when we first came to the world. You can see that through our teeth, that our teeth are like a cow or a horse. Scientists or researchers tell us that we were plant-based eaters, but we can independently verify it for ourselves, that we started out that way. But then over time, we started to eat meat because we ran out of vegetables. We became so populous that we didn't have the fruits and vegetables that we needed. So we started being scavengers and running animals away from their kill, and we took over their kill. That wasn't enough meat for us, so we started doing organized hunting. That wasn't enough meat for us, so we started doing manufactured farming. So as long as you're eating a living being, there's been a killing. You've contributed to that killing. But whether or not you choose to do that or not is a choice for you to make. I wouldn't say that it's unacceptable, because now that we've been eating meat for so long, for so many generations, there's a lot of bodies that are dependent on meat. And that if somebody did move to a plant-based food supply wholly and 100%, they would actually potentially die themselves because of that. So there's going to be people that maybe through all their best efforts try to work towards a plant-based food supply, but maybe 5% or 10%, they still need to eat some kind of animal products. And that might be what they need to do for a generation or two. But eventually, if human beings move to plant-based food supply like we once were, we will actually completely get free of this attachment to meat, and we'll see more and more improvement in the world. Because like we just experienced COVID, right? This came from our decision to interact with the animal world in the way that we do. Like they found vaccines and they discovered vaccines and they invented those, and that took care of COVID for now. I mean, it's still in our human in humanity. People are still experiencing it, but it largely took care of it. But it hasn't solved the underlying problem. The root core of the problem that led to COVID is our decision to eat animals, and now because of that, it produced this virus coming into the human world, and there's a whole litany of other viruses in the animal world waiting for us if we continue to eat and interact with animals in this way. This is where HIV came from, bird flu, swine flu, mad cow disease, I mean, you name it, COVID. There's a whole slew of others that are waiting for us. So if we choose to move to a plant-based food supply, over multiple generations, human beings can completely get on a plant-based food supply. We won't see all these viruses coming in, and we won't see pandemics and epidemics and things like this that are occurring in the in humanity. But whether we choose to do that or not is up to us. But it's going to take multiple generations for people to move in that direction, because some people are still going to need a certain amount of animal products in order to survive, in order to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But individuals who do that, they're going to probably try to make every best effort to move to a plant-based food supply, realize that through one way or another that they're not able to do that, and then they're eating that meat just out of living compassionately for this living being. They're not doing it based on sensual desire or ill will towards these animals, but instead they're doing it in order to live compassionately for this living being. You're welcome. All right, let me turn this on. Get a little bit warm in here. There's just one air conditioning on. Okay, no other questions here. Let me just check online. Let's see. Okay. Don't see any other questions. So let's move to the next precept. This next one is abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given without stealing. So there's multiple aspects of what the Buddha is teaching you here, because if you're stealing, there's a certain craving, a longing, a yearning, and there's a certain ill will towards this other being, that you're stealing something from them and harming them. And this is coming from the ignorance. Just like the first precept, there has to be a certain craving in the mind to be willing to kill another being. There has to be a certain ill will in the mind, potentially, to kill this other being. And there needs to be this ignorance or unknowing of true reality. So by choosing to learn and practice these precepts, you're working on eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance. The same thing here with this one. So obviously the Buddha is teaching us not to steal, because if we steal, we're causing harm to other beings. I can't cause someone else to be discontent, but I could cause harm. If I stole someone's car, I've just caused them harm, because now they can't go to work. They can't make money. They can't go to the store and acquire basic necessities that they need in order to survive. If they have children, they can't take their children to school, right? This is going to cause this family harm or this person harm if I steal their car, right? So where stealing is coming from is the mind is craving for something, it's longing and yearning, and it's not willing to do the work to acquire that thing for itself. So it tries to steal it. And this is coming from craving, anger, and ignorance. Then it's important to understand that it would be unwise to assume that something could be used, because if I was a college student handing in a paper to my professor and there's a stapler on their desk and the professor is out of the room, and I just assume that that stapler could be used, and I just pick up the stapler and I start stapling the paper, and the professor walks in, they're like, "Hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler." Right? They're attached to their stapler. This person maybe is not very generous, right? And they're like, "Hey, that's my stapler." And now they're angry. Now they're frustrated. Well, my decision to assume that I can use this stapler is going to lead to the difficulties and struggles that I experience here, because that professor doesn't realize that they're causing their own anger. They're causing their own frustration. They think I'm the one who's causing it. And now I get an F on that paper. Or maybe they fail me in the entire class. They're so angry, right? And this is the result of my decisions, where in reality, I could have just asked the professor, "Hey, can I use your stapler?" And they would have either said yes or no. And if they said no, I could have just went and found one somewhere else, right? I didn't have to just assume that I could use this. So you need to be careful that when you're using things that don't belong to you, that you don't assume that they can be used. Then the Buddha here says, accept what is given. You can see it in his teachings there, where he says, accept what is given. This is because if you accept what people are giving you, it's helping to enhance the quality of their mind. If they're practicing generosity and they're giving you something, if you shut it down, they wouldn't be able to enhance the quality of their mind through their practice of generosity. And if you did that enough, people would stop giving you stuff. So if around the holidays, Grandma gives you this sweater and you know that you're never going to wear this sweater ever, maybe you'd find it to not be very attractive. What the Buddha is teaching you is accept that gift, right? You accept that because it's enhancing the quality of grandmother's mind that she's practicing generosity. But now what you could do is you could practice generosity and you could give it to somebody else. And now maybe it goes through 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different hands. And it finally finds somebody and they're like, "That's the most beautiful sweater that I've ever seen. I'm going to wear that every single day," right? So now all these people had an opportunity to practice generosity and nobody's holding on to things and clinging to it. So this is what you would like to be able to do. If grandmother gets angry because you gave away her sweater, she wasn't practicing pure generosity. She had an expectation that when she gave it to you, that you would wear it. And now she's causing her own anger. You're not causing her anger. She's causing it herself. Because the other option would be to put it in the closet and let it sit there for 20 or 30 years. And now it deteriorates and those resources go to waste. So if you accept what is given, then if it's something that you're not going to use, give it to somebody else. But remember, this isn't black and white. That's not how the Buddha taught. If somebody offers you heroin or crystal methamphetamine, are you going to accept what is given? No, right? You're going to be like, "Hey, I'm good. Thanks. See you later. Bye." Right? You're just going to walk away, right? So you need to use your higher consciousness and you need to decide what is wise and unwise. The Buddha's not teaching you black and white. He's not teaching you rules and commandments. He's teaching you to look at a situation and understand when people practice generosity with you, this is really helpful for their mind and you'd like to just accept it, right? And then you practice generosity if you like. But there are going to be some situations where you might not accept that person's generosity, and that's one of the examples. Awaiting what is given. Awaiting what is given is where, if, say you have a life partner that's going on a business trip, if you were to say, hey, you're going to that place, they have really good this and that and this and that, get me this and get me that and get me this and get me that. You've just loaded this person up with a bunch of expectations. And now they're feverishly going around the town looking for the things that you want. And if they bring those things back for you, you get happy. But if they don't bring you those things, you'll get angry or frustrated. So the Buddha teaches you just await what is given. Don't constantly be asking people. But again, it's not black and white, right? Because if somebody said to you, hey, by the way, I'm going back to the USA, is there anything you would like me to get for you when I'm headed back? They're practicing generosity now, right? And you might accept that. You might be, hey, yeah, by the way, I need this particular thing. I can't find it here in Thailand. Can you get that for me? Right? And now they might have offered that, and now they're going to fulfill that. Same thing with this one. Assuming something can be used or taken. Say I was out in my neighborhood, in my village, and I come across a neighbor who has a laceration on their arm because they're working in the yard and they're bleeding profusely. And they're going to bleed out and they're going to die. And now say my other neighbor has a piece of fabric on their front porch and nobody's around, and I could just grab that fabric and put a tourniquet on their arm, and now I could save their life, right? I've now just saved someone's life, and I've taken something that hasn't been given here. But now, after this person's loaded up in the ambulance and they're on their way to the hospital, I'm going to probably go talk to the neighbor and say, hey, by the way, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I took that fabric from your front porch. I would like to replace this for you. How much was it? Where can I buy it? What can I do to make amends here? Right? So the Buddha's not teaching you black and white here. He's teaching you to move to this higher consciousness and be able to understand what it is that you're facing on any given day. You're going to need to be able to take in all the variables and figure out what would be wise and unwise in any given situation. He's giving you this structure to be able to see how to apply these in a day-to-day life. But it's ultimately going to come down to your wise decision making. This is called discernment, that you need to practice discernment. But if you understand the natural laws, instead of just taking that fabric off your neighbor's yard, your neighbor's porch, you're going to go back and you're going to talk to them and sort it out and make sure you keep your Kamma clean, right? You're not going to just go on with your day, right? So this is what the Buddha is teaching you. Any questions here? Okay, it looks like we have a question here on Zoom. One moment. Okay, question on Zoom. Let's see, let me find it because there's multiple questions here. What if you get raped and get pregnant? If I terminate the pregnancy, I am not compassionate to the being. But if I continue, I'm not compassionate to myself. How to judge this? So when we use the word judge, it means to measure and compare another being and decide what's wholesome or unwholesome. That's coming through the mind's conceit. So what you're asking here is what it would be a wise decision if you were raped and you became impregnated. This is where you're going to have to decide for yourself, right? Because in some situations, somebody might choose to have that baby. We actually have a family friend who was raped when I was growing up, and she decided to have the baby. And then there might be another situation where someone might choose not to have the baby. What you need to be able to do is decide, are you going to be able to raise this baby in a loving and warm and compassionate and friendly way? Are you going to be able to give this baby a wonderful life? Or is it going to re-victimize you, where you keep thinking about this rape over and over and over again? And that's a decision for each individual person. I can't make that decision for somebody, but if you do take a life, you would most likely experience things like guilt and shame and fear and things of this nature. And it does affect the health of the body as well. But this is a kind of situation where it comes down to the individual making their own decision. And all of these things, it always comes down to the individual making their own decision. So in that situation, just like everyone, I would say, here's what it is that you would experience if you choose to terminate the pregnancy, which is what I just described. And here's what you would experience if you don't terminate it. You know, you can experience, yes, the body would potentially be more healthy, but also there's the potential of seeing this child and experiencing the rape over and over and over again within your own mind. So this is where an individual needs to decide, can they let that go and give this child a loving, warm, friendly home to be able to grow up in? So that's for that person to decide. There's another question here as well. What if you, that's the same thing. You just put the same question twice. Okay. All right. So let me see if we have any other questions here. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So now we'll move on to the third precept. This is usually translated as no sexual misconduct, but you can see that the Buddha's words here are much more illuminating, much more detailed to be able to help you understand what he's talking about. Here he says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So he's talking about multiple things here. He's talking about harm that you cause through your sexual activity, because you could potentially cause harm through your sexual activity. And if you cause harm, harm is going to come back to you. So this first one here that I have, which is sex with minors, that's what he's talking about here when he talks about eliminating sex with people who are protected by their family. Because if you're having sex with young children, like 8, 12 years old, this is causing harm, because that individual is learning and growing and developing with their parents. And you probably remember how impactful it was to have sex the first time. This is going to lure that individual away from their family, and it's going to make it challenging for them to learn and grow and develop, because they're not prepared to make a decision of whether or not to have sex or not. So the Buddha is teaching it would be unwise to have sex with children. So this is where in most parts of the world, the human laws match the natural law of Kamma. But there are some places in the world that it's legal to have sex with minors. And in those kinds of situations, if you look at those societies, they're not doing very well. Their government is very much in turmoil. Their economy and their social systems are not very well developed. This is because people are having sex so early in life without consent, essentially, that these children are essentially being forced to have sex. They're not making a conscious choice themselves. And now, because of that, the society as a whole is really struggling. So that's why the Buddha teaches this. That's the Kamma. The Buddha says here, whose violation entails a penalty. What he's talking about there is sex without consent. If we were to rape somebody, this is going to cause harm, and harm can come to us. We can be injured. We can be murdered ourselves. We can be arrested. This is the reason why the Buddha teaches that. Up here where the Buddha says abandoning unchastity, this is having sex with multiple partners. What chastity is during ancient times, there were fathers who put metal underwear on their daughters, and they had a lock and key. And only the father actually had the lock and key, or the key. I can't imagine wearing metal underwear around, but apparently women did this during ancient times because the fathers were so concerned about their daughter having sex that they put these metal underwear on their child. So this would be chastity. This is like having no sex with anybody, right? Well, unchastity would be the opposite of that. That would be having sex with lots of different people, right? Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 people in 1 week, for example. Well, if you're having sex with multiple partners, there's going to be unwholesome results here. This is where we get STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. This is where we can get in fights and we can get beat up. We can get murdered. We can have our personal property damaged because people get jealous and they start being vindictive and fighting over you and things like this. This is the unwholesome results that we experience as a result of having sex with multiple people. We can even lose our reputation. If we have a certain reputation in the community, that can be degraded due to these kinds of decisions. In some cultures, they have the situation whereas if you meet somebody and you guys are a couple, you might go to your parents and say, hey, can we live at your house while we're saving money to buy our own house? And the parents might say, sure, you guys can move right on in. And in this situation, the family has accepted the relationship. And if you're having sex in that situation, that's not what the Buddha is talking about here, where he says people who are protected by their relatives. Because in that situation, the relatives have accepted the relationship. So if you're in that type of culture, you decide to do something like that, that's something that the family has accepted. Here, where it says sex with someone who's previously decided to remain celibate, that's where the Buddha is saying who are protected by teachings, right? Someone who has decided to remain celibate, this is someone who's given up sexual activity. And ultimately, to get to the third or the fourth stage of enlightenment, an individual would need to eliminate sexual activity. You can get to the first and second stage of enlightenment while still having sex, and you can do all the other work on the path to enlightenment, and your life's going to be quite peaceful in that first and second stage of enlightenment. But you're still going to get agitated and frustrated when you want sex and you can't get it. So you'll be able to do all the other work on the path to enlightenment, hanging out in that second stage of enlightenment. But every now and again, you're going to get frustrated and agitated because you can't get sex. So you're not going to be able to get to the permanent peace and permanent joy of enlightenment until the mind fully eliminates that. And now may or may not be that time for you, depending on what age you are. You may be young, you may be having a family, you may still be having sex, and that's fine. Continue to have sex if that's what you're choosing to do, but the Buddha is giving you guidance on how to do this in a way that isn't harmful. So if there's someone who's decided to give up sexual activity and they're trying to make their way to enlightenment, the very best thing that could ever happen for that person is for them to get to enlightenment. And the very best thing that could happen for a community of people is to have somebody within your community get to enlightenment. Because if somebody gets to enlightenment, they're going to be able to share the teachings with other people of how to get to enlightenment. So if you were to lure this person away from their vow of celibacy, this is causing harm to that person and to the community at large. So the Buddha is teaching you that it would be unwise to have sex with someone who's decided to remain celibate. Here in Thailand, they make this very easy for you because anybody who's wearing an orange robe and shaved their head, this is an ordained practitioner, they're choosing not to have sex, or at least they should choose not to have sex with others. So you wouldn't be interested in choosing to have sex with that type of person. Here in Thailand, also, people who wear all white and shave their head, they're choosing not to have sex as well. I don't wear all white and shave my head because I'm trying to advertise that I don't have sex, because I wouldn't be interested to do that. I don't choose to have sex any longer, but that's not why I chose to wear white and shave my hair. I chose this for other reasons. But just so you know, here in Thailand, people who wear white every day and shave their hair, they're typically not having sex with other people. So if you're interested in having sex, then you interact with someone who's choosing to have sex. And that's going to help you to be able to practice this particular precept. Here, where I say people who are already in committed relationships and people having sex outside of relationships you're committed to, that's where the Buddha talks here about someone who has a husband, wife, or partner, or someone who is in an engagement. If you were to have sex with people like that, or if you were to go outside of your relationship or lure somebody outside of their relationship, once again, this is where you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can have your material possessions destroyed, you can lose your reputation, you can lose your job, you can get sexually transmitted diseases in these situations. So it's really unwise to do these kinds of things. Also, if people are human trafficked, this is people who are being forced to have sex against their will typically. There's usually payment involved. In these situations, once again, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. If you're going into those kind of environments, you can even get robbed. This is all the results of your decisions. Whether you choose to do these things or not, it's your choice, right? Then paid sexual services, even if people are willingly doing this, they're a paid sexual worker. Once again, this is unchastity. So in this situation, you're going to potentially get sickness and illness like sexually transmitted diseases. You can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed. These are all things that occur. Notice that the Buddha here doesn't say anything about same gender relationships. And the reason why is because there's no harm. That's why he's not talking about it here. He was aware of it because it's been happening since the beginning of time. There's never been a time where all men or all women had sex with the opposite gender. If that was the case, that would be permanence. So we know from the beginning of time that people have been having sex with the opposite gender, but also with the same gender as well. It's been happening since the very beginning of time. You can see it in his teachings. He essentially talks about it, but he doesn't teach anything about it. He just makes an observation that it's occurring, and that's it. So he was aware of this, but he doesn't include it in this particular precept because it's not causing harm. So if you're somebody who prefers same-gender relationships, or you know someone who does, you're not causing any harm to anybody. But the thing is that other people, they have a craving for every man or every woman to have sex with the opposite gender. And when that's not getting fulfilled, they get angry. Their ill will is arising, and it's coming from their ignorance or their unknowing of true reality. They don't understand the universal truth of impermanence, that not every person's going to have sex with the opposite gender. So you can have that wisdom, and you can understand that people who choose to have sex with the same gender, they're not actually causing any harm. So you can maintain your calmness and your peacefulness and not have a craving for everybody to do it a certain way. Then some people ask me about transgender individuals. This can be completely understood through the teachings of the Buddha as well. If you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely different, the idea that this mind is going to identify as the same gender as the sexual organs every single time, that would be permanence. So we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that some minds are going to identify with the sexual organs and some are not. And you can also understand through the cycle of rebirth that we've all been different genders at different times in the past. And now this mind ending up in this body, it could be identifying as a different gender. So if I've been a squirrel that was a female, a rabbit that was a female, a bird that was a female, a human being that was a female, and now that mind ends up in a male body that has male sexual organs, the mind could identify as a female, right? So if every single mind identified with the same exact gender of the physical organs, this would be permanence. And we can understand it through the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth, that a transgender individual is completely normal. They haven't done anything wrong. So if you don't identify with the same gender as the sexual organs, you haven't done anything wrong. You're completely normal. This happens all over the world. It's been happening from the beginning of time. Again, the Buddha even talked about this 2,500 years ago. He explained this in his teachings. This is how wise he was about the natural law of Kamma, that he understood that there's no harm in same-gender relationships. Nowadays, we have lots of people in the world that don't understand the wisdom of this, and this just shows you how wise he was, that 2,500 years ago, he already understood this. Sex with animals is one of those things that's really black and white, that an animal can't give you consent to have sex with it. And I imagine if somebody tried to do that, they would get injured. They could get diseases and illnesses and things like this. This is really unwise. Pornography is something that is coming from the mind's craving, the longing, yearning, where oftentimes people go into this fantasy world with pornography through images, and now they get so indulgent in that, and it's typically involving masturbation, which I realize I skipped. I'll have to come back to that, which oftentimes involves masturbation, and now someone gets so indulgent in that it's very hard to come back out of that. And when they come out of it, they oftentimes find that it's hard to have real meaningful experiences with human beings in terms of having sexual activity. So if you're currently involved in having pornography, you will find that by getting rid of this, it'll actually free your mind of that craving, and you'll have more focus, more concentration. You'll have more meaningful relationships with the people around you. But if you keep allowing the mind to go into this fantasy world with pornography, you're going to find that it's very challenging to have meaningful relationships, particularly intimate relationships with the people around you. Masturbation, sometimes people think that this is very harmful and they should never do it. But it really depends on what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. What you're working to do on the path to enlightenment, among other things, is you're working to bring down your sensual desire, where your mind isn't longing, yearning, and forming its inner feelings based on some condition. So one of the things that is the strongest sensual desire is sexual activity. The mind can oftentimes long and yearn for sexual activity. And if you're trying to eliminate your sexual activity or reduce it, sometimes masturbation can actually be really helpful. So I'll give you some examples of where masturbation could be helpful. Say somebody is listening to me talk and they have like 5 or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends. And they're like, whoa, I should really bring this down to one person. This is really unwise of me. But they have this really high sexual craving. So now when they bring it down to one person, they have all this sexual craving. But they use a little bit of masturbation to be able to help them bring that down. This can actually be really helpful for them because they went from 10 boyfriends or girlfriends down to 1. This was really helpful for them. Or say somebody has an urge or a craving to rape somebody, and now they use some masturbation instead. This is actually really helpful in that situation. They didn't cause harm to others. But also, if somebody was masturbating excessively, maybe 15, 20 times a day, this would actually take their mind in the opposite direction. Their sensual desire is increasing. So if your masturbation is helping you to decrease your sensual desire, this is actually helpful. Where if it's helping to increase your sensual desire, this is actually harmful. If you know anything about a dam, like a physical structure that holds back water, that when that dam is rising up higher and higher and higher, and it's putting pressure on the dam, these are usually multi-million-dollar structures. What they do is they open up the doors in order to release the water out, and then the pressure of the water goes down, and then they close the dam again. And this is how they protect this multi-million-dollar structure. Well, your mind's going to function similarly. When you're working to reduce or eliminate your sexual craving, you might notice all this pressure building up in your mind where you just really want to have sex and you can't have it. That's where masturbation can come in. It can help you to release that pressure. Maybe you went 2 weeks without sex, and now you use a little bit of masturbation to help you. And now, having done that, maybe you go 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks without sex, and now you need to do a little bit of masturbation to help you. And now, over a period of time, you get to the point where you've completely eliminated or reduced your sexual cravings. So masturbation can be a way to help you to accomplish that. Do you guys have any questions on this? Yep.
My question is, you said that you can only get to a state of full enlightenment if you remove completely sexual activity. Then if everyone were to do that, like if the entire world were, set on the path to enlightenment, and then everyone would stop having a sexual relationship, then our species will stop existing.
Yes, that's right.
So the final goal is the extinction of human beings.
That's not the goal, but ask yourself, is humanity permanent or impermanent?
I guess it is impermanent in the amount of humanity, but then isn't that also what is natural for human beings to do in a, I would say, wise and moderate way, but having relationship with other people that also sometimes include having sexual relationship for having a family and all of that.
Is humanity going to permanently exist on this planet?
I'm not sure. We might get like an explosion of the earth or something, but then to aim to do that, isn't that counter, doesn't go on the opposite direction of actually living a peaceful life, is going towards actually not having a life?
That's not what I'm teaching, to exterminate life, but humanity is not permanent. It will come to an extinction at some point because humanity arose, it changes, which is what you were talking about, like the number of humans change, but then it's going to fade away. It's going to not exist at some point. It's only a matter of time before humanity no longer exists. This is the way that it most likely is going to happen, through beings becoming more and more enlightened and choosing not to have sex. And that's okay. humanity doesn't need to be permanent. But when the mind of a human being is craving permanent existence, they can't fathom humanity not existing. But one way or another, humanity will come to an end. Because of the universal truth of impermanence, we can see that that's true. Mm-hmm. More questions? Jake, you had a question? No?
I was just going to say that even if we...
If you could get a mic, we have a bunch of people online.
Even if we know that, or if we survive our own wars and all this, that eventually we know that our sun is going to go out or explode, and eventually this world won't exist.
Yeah,
based on all the evidence we have.
Yeah, the sun is impermanent. The earth itself is impermanent. All of these things are impermanent. But until you've studied the universal truth of impermanence and you see it for yourself, there can be a craving for these things to be permanent. It's not going to happen during our lifetime, at least this lifetime, that the earth or the sun is going to be eliminated. But we know that they're impermanent. It's only a matter of time before these things come to an end, because they arose, they change, and they fade away. They are impermanent. Liz?
So I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this, but when humans, the form of humanity is gone through the like sun flare or through everyone achieving enlightenment, is underneath that, are humans the only form that the Buddha ascribes the ability to eliminate suffering?
Human beings can do it, and heavenly beings can do it as well. In those two realms, you can get to enlightenment, but in the lower realms of hell, animal, and afflicted spirits, those beings don't have the same type of consciousness to be able to experience enlightenment. But those beings will be reborn into a human existence or a heavenly existence with the opportunity to get to enlightenment. And that's one of the reasons why you should really value this human existence and not allow the mind to be complacent that, wow, you got to this human existence. Don't allow that to go to waste. Like, really put in effort to get to enlightenment, because this is very rare to come into the world as a human being.
So I have one more question, if that's okay. My question is, if and when all
It's still on.
If and when all human forms are eliminated or have achieved enlightenment, will the Buddha have considered the purpose? Like, will all discontent then be eliminated?
All discontentedness would be eliminated if all beings got into enlightenment. His goal, and the goal of these teachings, isn't to exterminate humanity. That's not the goal, but that is a natural fact of what will happen either way, whether it's through these teachings or some other method. It's going to happen. But yes, if everybody got to enlightenment in the world, we'd probably call it heaven on earth. Because if everybody was walking around enlightened, nobody would be causing harm to anybody. Everyone would be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. It would be such a wonderful world to live in. But if we do the work that we need to do in this life, we'll never see that world. But the beings after us will be able to create that world through the wisdom that we cultivate and restore back into the world.
Okay, thank you.
It's kind of like planting trees that you're never going to enjoy the shade of those trees. So by us getting to enlightenment in this lifetime, it brings that wisdom into the world in a way that other people can also get to enlightenment after us. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move to the next one. This one's very straightforward. Abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Okay, so what the Buddha is teaching here is that it's unwise to tell lies. If you've ever done a lot of lying, you know that your mind was probably obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another. So how could you ever get to peace and joy if your mind was obsessed with lying and you were trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another? Again, the whole reason why the mind does lie is because of craving, desire, attachment. The mind wants something. And if you tell the truth, you're not going to get what you want. So the mind lies So there's underlying craving here that's causing all of this. And that's why the Buddha is teaching you that it's unwise to lie, because when you make decisions through craving, it's going to lead to unwholesome results. People are going to discover your lies, and they're going to know that you're unreliable, that you're not dependable. And now they're not going to see you as being trustworthy. So that's why it's important to practice this particular precept. The Buddha understood this so well that you can see this other teaching that I've inserted here, where he was teaching his son. Some people think that the Buddha left his family and never came back, but he actually came back. His wife, his son, his stepmother, all these people started ordaining with him to be able to get to enlightenment. So here he's teaching his son, Rahula, and he's explaining to him that you shouldn't even tell a lie as part of a joke. Oftentimes when we lie, or oftentimes when we tell jokes, you might lie, or you might be degrading or diminishing to other people or to yourself. But if you take your time and use your wisdom, you can create jokes that are truthful, that aren't degrading and diminishing of other people. And if you can do that, you're going to see that your life practice becomes more and more peaceful, and that the people around you see that you're not causing harm and that you're not lying even as a joke. If you can imagine this Buddha who was so wise and was sharing these teachings with others to be able to get to enlightenment, if during classes like this, he's talking about the teachings and telling the truth, but on the side, he was lying, like when he's telling jokes, you wouldn't have confidence in this person or have trust in them that they're actually telling the truth when they're speaking in the classes. So the Buddha understood this so well that he didn't even tell a joke that had a lie in it. Now, you might not see a Buddha as someone who tells jokes, but I can tell you a Buddha has a personality just like you. Oftentimes when you see the Buddha, he's in all these very serious positions of meditating and very somber and solemn, right? That's how people like to depict him. But an enlightened being is cheerful. They're bright. They're having fun. They enjoy life fully. They have gladness and cheerfulness in their mind. They're going to tell jokes. They have a personality, right? So feel free to tell all the jokes that you like. Have fun out there in life. Enjoy your life. That's what life's all about. But doing so while being honest and trustworthy is what you would like to be able to do. And this is what will have your mind have peace of mind. Because at nighttime, if you're ruminating about all those lies you told and you have difficulties falling asleep, that's no fun, right? So if you just always tell the truth, you have nothing to worry about and you can conduct life with ease. Any questions on this one? Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so now the last one. This one's really important because if you do this one, or if you don't do this one, all the others are more likely to happen. Here the Buddha says, refrain from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So again, you're not interested in assuming anything. If there's something that you don't understand about a teaching of the Buddha, don't just assume that your vocabulary is the same as the Buddha's or whoever translated this. This word heedlessness, if you don't know what that means, you need to go look it up and investigate it. And I did that. But don't trust me, right? Don't just believe what I'm sharing. If you need to go look it up for yourself, look it up. What it means is careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. So if we're putting substances into the body that is promoting a lack of mindfulness or a lack of awareness of mind, we're more likely to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, and to lie. If you go talk to people who are in prison or in jail, they'll tell you that they're there for murder or they're there for robbing a bank or what have you. But if you really talk to them and say, why is it that you're here? They'll say it's substances, about 80% of them, because they say, I would have never killed that person if I wasn't high on drugs, or I would have never robbed that bank if I wasn't feeding a habit, right? So these substances are going to lead to all kinds of unwise decisions because you're lacking that awareness of mind. So I've got a few here that we can talk about that are going to help you to be able to understand this precept. So marijuana is one that we know has medical purposes and medical benefits. There's actually children who have like 20 seizures a day and they give them a little CBD oil on the tongue and they don't have another seizure for like 6 months, right? So this plant absolutely has medical purposes and medical benefits, but it can also be used for heedlessness. So it really depends on how you're using the plant. Usually if you're looking for a high, people are looking for high THC content in the plant. Whereas if they're looking for the medical properties, you're looking for a high CBD aspect of the plant. And usually people who are looking for a high, they will typically be smoking it. And people who are looking for medical benefits might be ingesting it like an oil or an edible or something like this, because it's not causing harm to the body. So whether you're using it for a medical benefit or a high, only you're going to absolutely know that. But just know that the marijuana plant is not going to solve your stress. It's not going to solve your anxiety. It's not going to solve difficulties falling asleep and things like this. Those things are being caused by craving, desire, attachment, and that's what's going to eliminate this. The marijuana plant will cover this up a little bit, but as soon as you stop taking marijuana, the stress and anxiety is still there. The difficulty sleeping is still there. So if you work on eliminating your craving, desire, attachments, then you'll be able to actually eliminate that stress and anxiety that's underlying that. Then there's cigarettes. We've learned over the years that cigarettes don't have any medical benefits whatsoever, and that's why more and more people have moved away from those, and we're not seeing all the health issues that we once did. Of course, there's still some people who smoke. If you're someone who's smoking, I would encourage you to gradually eliminate that. You're going to find more benefits in having not ingesting substances like cigarettes. You're going to need to pay attention to prescription medications because some prescriptions can be addicting. So if you get a prescription from a doctor, I don't ever suggest that you blindly take that prescription. You should research each prescription that you're being given. And if what you come back with is that this prescription is addictive, you might decide to talk to your doctor and see if there's another option. And there might be another option that you can get that's not addictive. But there are some situations where maybe that's the only option available. And in that situation, at least you know that this substance is potentially addictive. And now you can try to get off of it as quick as possible. Just use it for a temporary period of time. So pay attention to your prescription medications. Then you might decide to look at your caffeine intake because caffeine is a substance that causes heedlessness. You don't need this to survive, but oftentimes people ingest caffeine because they're trying to get to that heightened state of energy. But the problem with that is then you're going to crash on the other side of that. By the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is uplifted and bright and radiant all day long. You don't get tired. You don't get exhausted. You get sleepy where you need to sleep, but you don't get tired or exhausted. You can sustain your energy all day long. But if you turn to caffeine, it's going to lift your mind up in this elevated state, and then it's going to crash off, and you're never giving your mind the opportunity to develop that natural, consistent energy all day long. So you might decide to look at this and choose to get off of the caffeine. And as you do so, you might experience withdrawal symptoms. Just like a harsh drug, you'll go through withdrawal symptoms. You'll have the same thing with caffeine. But let this remind you that you are detoxing from a drug. You might get headaches. You might get shakes. You might get sweats, things like this. But you're also going to get all the benefits when you get off of it. You're going to notice that you sleep better, that you think better, that you process the world around you better. You're getting more natural energy. So you don't need to rely on caffeine. You can choose to get rid of that. You're going to need to pay attention to your sugar intake. We kind of figured this out as a child. If we take too much sugar, we go to that sugar high and then we crash. So be sure you pay attention to your sugar intake and you're not taking that in excess. Some people will tell you that psychedelic substances will actually help you get to enlightenment. You may have heard this from different people. I can assure you that it doesn't help you to get to enlightenment. It can produce certain qualities of mind that kind of mimic some of the things that you might be needing to develop in order to get to enlightenment. It promotes this introspection where you can look inward at the mind, but you're only doing this because of the substance. What you need to be able to do to get to enlightenment is to cultivate this quality within the mind, because you're going to need to be introspective all throughout your day. If you have a certain situation going on, you can't be like, hey, Mom, hold on a second. I need to go drop a hit of acid. I'm going to get introspective here, and then I'm going to come back and let you know what I think about that topic. You're not going to be able to do that. So if you rely on substances like psychedelics, you're not going to be able to experience that introspection all day long to be able to develop that naturally within your mind. But there's kind of some things that psychedelics mimic. It's kind of like if you were walking down the street and you were doing window shopping and you saw this beautiful handbag in the store and you'd like to go in and touch the handbag. You can see it, but you can't go in and touch it because you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. So psychedelics are that kind of thing, that it kind of looks like and appears like there's something over there that you really might really like to get someday, but you can't actually get it and touch it because the psychedelic substances are keeping you chained down, and you can't actually get free of that to the point where you can become introspective naturally within your own mind. So these are just a few that you will need to consider. This isn't an exhaustive list, but the way that the Buddha teaches is it's timeless, right? This word heedless can apply to any and all substances. He could have never imagined that we would have invented PCP or LSD. These are all chemical based. They didn't have those kinds of things when he was teaching. So the way he taught is he taught in a way that's timeless, that now and forever, if there's any substance that is created that produces heedlessness within the mind, it would be unwise to ingest that because it's taking your mind in the opposite direction of enlightenment, because you would like to cultivate mindfulness. You would like to cultivate awareness of mind. But these kinds of things and others are taking you in the opposite direction of that, because you're going to need that mindfulness in order to be able to transform the mind. And when you're taking substances, it's not going to allow you to cultivate that mindfulness. And you're more likely to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, or lie. So that's why the Buddha taught you that it would be unwise to do this. But again, whether you do it or not, it's your choice. You'll experience the consequences of those decisions, but the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that it's unwise to do so. So any questions here on this topic?
My question is specifically about the drug ayahuasca, which produces DMT, which your body does produce. If this would be one of these substances, and specifically used to many people that have taken it describe encounters with other beings, and so to be able to understand these other beings, is that something that he would say is wise or unwise?
That falls under psychedelic substances, because that's what the ayahuasca does. Any kind of experience that someone might be having with ayahuasca or LSD or all these other kinds of things, you can experience those same things that are permanent through training your mind. So like I've heard of some people, they're going off for, like, if they have some trauma in their mind, some kind of negative experience that their mind's holding on to, they will go off to these retreats and take things like LSD and psychedelic mushrooms. And what they're saying is it's helping them to release that from their mind. But their mind hasn't actually learned how to let go. So they're not actually experiencing the full relief and the full peace and joy that you can experience if you train your mind with the teachings of the Buddha. Continuing to rely on any kind of substance like that to produce anything, that is actually an attachment, where now the mind has to have this thing in order to experience this thing. Where what you would like to do is be able to train the mind internally so that you can have peace and joy irregardless of all these things that the mind is maybe wanting to grab onto. So an enlightened being wouldn't take ayahuasca or LSD or any of those kinds of things, and that's not what they were doing that led to their enlightenment. An individual who got to enlightenment would have trained their mind with these teachings, and now naturally their mind is performing optimally, and it doesn't need those kinds of substances. Okay, let me see if we have anything online here. Okay, I don't see any questions here online either. Okay, so it's now basically about 1 o'clock, and this afternoon my plan is to teach you guys walking meditation. It only takes me about 10 minutes to actually teach it to you, and then it takes about 20 minutes or so for you to practice it, and then we'll have a little conversation about it. So we only need actually an hour this afternoon to be able to learn and practice walking meditation. So are you guys okay with like an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 5 minute lunch? I know we usually take an hour and a half, but like an hour would be good for you guys. Okay, so why don't we get back at 2 o'clock, and I'll teach you guys walking meditation, which is really good for an overactive mind, if you have a lot of energy in the mind, or if you're falling asleep during your meditation. So enjoy your lunch, and I'll see you guys at 2 o'clock. Okay, thank you so much for your questions.